Hello, gardeners, and welcome to Gabbing About Gardening on this Tuesday, May 25th. I'm your host, Lucretia Shanfarber. Gabbing About Gardening is a weekly radio show broadcast live from CKTZ, Cortes Community Radio, on 89.5 FM in Manson's Landing on beautiful Cortes Island in the Salish Sea. Thank you for tuning in, and thank you to Willow, the all-woman band from Quadra Island, for our lovely theme music. Thank you also to Cortes Market for their generous sponsorship of Gabbing About Gardening radio show. Cortes Market, where I always find seasonal bedding plants for my garden, along with a wide selection of quality seeds, comfy garden gloves, all kinds of garden tools, and many more garden supplies. Cortes Market in Manson's Landing on Cortes Island. It's the convenient local store for local gardeners. And thank you also to Speedy Bin Compost Bins. Speedy Bins help you make your best compost ever. At least it helps me make my best compost ever in less time and without worrying about rats, mice, or raccoons. Speedy Bins are made in Merville on Vancouver Island. They're a family-owned business who cares about you and your composting experience. Go to speedybin.com to learn more about Speedy Bin composters. We are also grateful for all the support of local and regional garden clubs. And you know, speaking of gratitude, wow, I so appreciate the generosity of gardeners. You know, we share our extra seeds. We gift one another starts and seedlings. We're always giving away or trading plants from our gardens. Gardeners just love to share their knowledge and experience with each other. And they share their harvest, too. And well, that's what Gabbing About Gardening radio show is all about. It's about our sharing. And on today's show, herbalist and nutritional consultant Brigitte Mars will gab with us all the way from Boulder, Colorado. Brigitte is going to tell us which weeds we should be eating. Then we'll gab about how to grow your best squash and carrots with Arzeena Hamir, an agronomist and professional market gardener in the Comox Valley. We're also going to gab with Loni Taylor on Cortes Island about her recent experience getting to know more about the plants in Haida Gwaii. And then we'll gab with Dr. Lee Gass on Quadra Island, the retired UBC science professor turned artist who studied hummingbirds for 40 years. That's all coming up today on Gabbing About Gardening. So stay with us. I'm Lucretia. Our first guest, this lady, I have known her for a long time. She's a dear friend and teacher of mine, Brigitte Mars. She has over 50 years experience teaching people about the use of herbs. She teaches herbal medicine at Naropi University and the School of Health Mastery in Iceland. She has taught at health and yoga institutes all around the world, including the Mayo Clinic. Brigitte is also a best-selling author. Her books and DVDs include Natural First Aid, The Home Reference to Holistic Health and Healing, The Country Almanac of Home Remedies, The Desktop Guide to Herbal Medicine, Beauty by Nature, Addiction-Free Naturally, The Sexual Herbal, Healing Herbal Teas, Rawsome, and she is co-author of the Hemp Nut Cookbook. Her latest project is a phone app called iPlant. Wow. Brigitte, you have been busy. Hello, and thanks so much for being with us.
Hi.
So you were one of the first people to popularize the idea of literally eating weeds. Which weeds do you suggest we eat and why?
Well, you know, Krisha, there's people have been doing this for a long time, so I'm not the first, but I might be one of the modern Renaissance people doing it. So, well, I want to share that many, many years ago, I lived in a teepee in the Ozarks, and I didn't know anything about country ways or gardening. I was, from upstate New York, and I was going to help this older woman weed her garden. And this one line she said to me changed my life. She said, while that there's lamb's quarter, it's wild spinach and it's good for you. And I remember thinking, wow, if I can eat the weeds, that means I'm going to have 2 to 3 times more food in my garden. And so I feel, that it is quite the travesty that people pull up the weeds and don't use them. And so, lamb's quarter is wild spinach, and it's even more nutritious than spinach. Lamb's quarter, there's quite a few varieties. They are Chenopodiaceae members of the goosefoot family. And not only do the weeds come up about a month before any of your cultivated vegetables, they're often here for a month afterwards because these weeds are hardy. So lamb's quarter's wild spinach. I have this week made spanakopita and salad and green eggs, no ham. I've made lamb's quarter quiche, lamb's quarter soup. And then in the autumn, you get seeds, which are also edible because lamb's quarter, like spinach, is a relative of quinoa and amaranth. And so, granted, I know all you gardeners, you want to grow tomatoes and broccoli and zucchini and all that. So my proposal is that you weed your garden with a colander, and while you're weeding, collect most of those weeds and put them in the colander. Now, I usually don't want to bring the roots in, that's just going to bring in a lot more dirt and sand and stuff that's hard to clean off. So I usually break off the roots and then use the roots for mulch to mulch the broccoli or tomatoes that I am trying to grow.
Yummy, yum. I love the spanakopita idea, but you're talking about actually collecting the seeds from lamb's quarters?
Well, you'll have to wait till the fall, but the seeds are also edible. And then, purslane is another one. Purslane was Mahatma Gandhi's favorite food. And we know that purslane is really high in omega-3 fatty acids, which is really good for our brain. Another great one, dandelion. People will go to such great lengths to kill the dandelion, but dandelion is an ancestor of lettuce. And the dandelion leaves are edible. They're going to be tastiest in the springtime before the plant flowers. And then the flowers are edible. Well, dandelion flowers are high in lutein, which is really good for our eyes. And then the dandelion roots you can dig up and saute it or marinate it and put it in a food dehydrator. And then the dandelion stems, those big long stems, you can boil them in the hot water for a couple of minutes and then saute them with garlic and olive oil or butter or coconut oil or whatever you prefer and make dandelion noodles.
Oh my gosh. Goodness. Okay, you're the first person I have ever heard tell that. I love it. I'm definitely going to try that. Because heaven knows I have a lot of dandelion stems in my garden right now, so I'm going to move in that direction. Now, purslane, Brigitte, Dr. Andrew Weil lives on Cortes Island part-time, and he's a huge fan of purslane. Can you describe a little bit of what it looks like, what we should be looking for in our gardens?
Well, I will just share that I do have a phone app called iPlant with Brigitte Mars. It works for iPhone and Android. So you can always check, is this purslane? But purslane is a low-growing plant. It has reddish stems. It is the wild version of portulaca, which is a common garden flower. But of course, we certainly don't want to eat anything that has been pesticided or that's growing too close to a busy road. But Lucretia, this is something we really need to keep in mind, is these wild plants are hardy. They're survivors. They grow without anybody planting them. They survive the frost. They survive the drought. And I think on this planet at this time, we're all looking for ways that we can have stronger immunity, more vitality, be more robust, save money, save time. And the weeds are really the answer. So rather than looking at dandelion as a nuisance, they actually aerate the soil. And in gardening folklore, where the dandelions grow is a good place to put the garden because they are showing that they're aerating the soil for you. And dandelions were deliberately brought here. So purslane, I love to use it to make gazpacho and salsa. It makes a great salad. Another wild weed is chickweed. I know some of you guys are saying, yes, I want to see the chickweed. But chickweed is a member of the same family as carnation, and that's also edible. So, again, another phone app that I like a lot is called Picture This. And it's $20 a year, but you can take pictures of weeds and it'll tell you within a few seconds what it is. Because I feel that learning to eat the weeds, it's fresh. I love it when I make a salad with dandelion and lamb's quarter and chickweed and purslane that my salad greens were growing like 5 minutes ago, 20 minutes ago. I know, you organic gardeners are also enjoying that, but there's a certain hardiness
Absolutely.
and adaptability that comes from the plants that reseed themselves and survive despite adversity.
I
think
love
they're
that
going to help us to be more Jedi.
More Jedi. Okay, we can all use some of that. And I do remember seeing your garden a few years ago, Brigitte, and absolutely loving it, the way that everything grew together. And just like you were saying, we would just go outside and you'd pick this and that. And I was like, wow, this is a completely different looking garden than I'm used to, but it was so full of delicious food.
Keep in mind that you can double or triple the yield of your garden. And, while you're weeding, be working on your next meal. And you can also dehydrate a lot of the weeds. This morning I picked about a bushel of nettles, stinging nettles, which I will dry for the winter. And we will make nettle tea during the winter and also things like nettle quiche and nettle spanakopita. Rudolf Steiner said nettles are the heart of the world. And yes, I know they sting you, but they are an incredible vegetable that loses its sting when it's been blended or juiced or pureed.
Yeah, we have a lot of nettles here on Cortes Island and Quadra Island and all up and down Vancouver Island, and people do take great advantage of it. Let me ask you about an herb that a lot of people don't really, including myself, know how to use, but it's popping up, and that's horsetail. What do you recommend? How do we use horsetail in a beneficial way?
Well, horsetail, equisetium, and there's a few varieties. So, equisetium, is best harvested in the springtime. And what is useful about it is it's so mineral rich. And so I usually, collect horsetail and dry it. Because I want to make tea out of it during the winter. It's great for remineralizing our bones and our teeth. And it's so high in trace minerals. And even the structure of the horsetail plant, it's almost like, nails that have a lot of ridges in them. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's a very primitive plant. We've had horsetail on our wonderful planet before the age of flowering plants. So horsetail was way back when the dinosaurs were here, before the age of flowering.
And I think it will be here for that long again, Brigitte. Hey, thank you for sharing this amazing herbal knowledge with us. I'm hoping you'll come back and be a regular on Gabbing About Gardening. Would that work out for you?
I would be so honored, Lucretia. Many blessings to you and your listeners. I love what you're doing.
Well, thank you. I love what you're doing, and I depend on you for this kind of help. Thanks so much, Brigitte. We'll talk again soon.
Many blessings.
And to
Bye-bye.
you. Bye-bye. That is Brigitte Mars. We've been gabbing with, herbalist and teacher about all kinds of wild plants from Boulder, Colorado. You can connect with Brigitte through her website, brigittemars.com. And coming up next is agronomist and professional market gardener, Arzeena Hamir from the Comox Valley. Stay tuned so you can get tips on how to grow your best squash and carrots ever. This is Gabbing About Gardening on CKTZ, Cortes Radio 89.5. I'm Lucretia, and we will be right back.
When I was a curly-headed baby, my daddy sat me down upon his knee. He said, son, you go to school and learn your letters. Don't you be no dusty miner boy like me. Well, I was born and raised at the mouth of the Hazard Holler. Coal cars roaring and a rumble past my door. Now they stand in a row, rusting empty, and the yelling end don't stop here anymore. I used to think my daddy was a black man, had script enough to buy the company store.
Welcome back to Gabbing About Gardening. Oh, what would we ever do without the expertise and patience of professional market gardener Arzeena Hamir? We gab with Arzeena every few weeks because this woman really knows how to grow all kinds of food crops. And we reached her today at Amara Farm, her family farm and produce stand in the Comox Valley. Hello, Arzeena, and thank you for being on the show.
Hi, Lou. Good to be back. Always enjoy chatting with you.
Oh, and we love having you. So today our focus is on growing squashes and carrots. But before we go there, will you please just gab for a minute about your background and what you do on your family farm, what an agronomist is?
Yeah, sure. So I studied agriculture in school. I have an undergraduate in crop science and a master's degree in agriculture as well. So my specialty is in plants and soils, which makes me an agronomist. So I've got some of the technical background, but really the bulk of what I learned is when I started farming about 10 years ago. So my husband and I set up Amara Farm in the Comox Valley about 10 years ago. It's a certified organic farm, so we don't use any pesticides or any synthetic chemical fertilizers. And we try and work with nature to produce healthy vegetables. We have 1.5 acres of vegetables and about 1.5 acres of fruit as well.
Oh, I'm looking forward to seeing it. I have not actually been there yet. And you do a lot of teaching. You're involved with a lot of young people, the young agrarians. You also sell starts and produce from your stand?
Yeah. I got into teaching actually quite a while ago. Again, having a background in agriculture I find helps me figure out sort of problem solving and figuring out what pests and diseases impacted, different gardeners, fruits and veg. So I started teaching so that people could do a bit of, or have a bit of background in that so that they understood where pests were coming from and what they were. So I do teach, here in the Comox Valley, and then I mentor some young farmers through the Young Agrarians program. So really enjoying that too.
Well, Thank you so much. And thank you for always being so available for us. So let's focus on the big S and the big C, squashes and carrots. Share your wisdom if you would.
Sure. So I think the big thing is the squash family is split up into two different kinds of squash. You have summer squash, which I think we most know as zucchini, but there's also within the zucchini family, there's the scalloped type of zucchinis. There's many different patty pans. These are all of the veggies that are eaten fresh, they're not storable. They're something that you eat during that season. And then there's the winter squash, which makes a huge family. It's everything from pumpkins to Hubbards, acorn, butternut, spaghetti. It's a really, really big family. So my suggestion is on the summer squash side, most people get inundated because they tried growing too many. I think a regular family of 4 probably doesn't need any more than 2 zucchini or summer squash plants. And then on the winter squash, a lot of it has to do with how you enjoy cooking your squash. Do you like making blended soups from them? Because different squash have different textures and different flavors. So really choose and pick the squash that you like, depending on how you like to cook it.
That's good advice. So do you start your squash seeds as a direct sow, or are you starting them off indoors?
We start ours off indoors. And I know, like, you can absolutely direct sow, and now would be a good time to direct sow. But for us, we try and push the season a little bit. And some of the squash, like butternut, tend to be very long season. And if you don't have quite the heat during the season, they don't properly ripen. So by starting from seed, we give ourselves at least a couple of weeks of extra time that would have otherwise taken longer for that seed to germinate outside. And so we get ahead of the season by at least a few weeks by starting our seed in trays, in pots, and then we transplant. However, there's always, like, squash is a bit of a finicky plant. If it gets too big in its pot, it doesn't like being transplanted. So the timing has to be really critical. If you are buying squash plants or, you're growing your own, you really don't want them to grow much bigger than 3 leaves, because squash does this thing that it sulks when it transplants.
Oh, I know what you're talking about. I have had sulking squash.
Yeah.
So you're saying
and
3 leaves?
The bigger the plant, the more sulking it does.
That's
is what
for
I
sure.
find. So you want to get it small, like 3 leaves, and that's it. So perfect size.
And do you put anything in the planting hole? Tell us.
Absolutely.
Okay, let's hear about that.
Yes. And, we do that with every vegetable we transplant. We always have either mixed into the whole bed or into the planting hole some amount of fertilizer. And that amount very much depends on if it's a light feeder or a heavy feeder. Now, I would say squash, because it's in the ground for quite a long period of time, I would rate it in the medium to heavy feeder, because I don't know if you've ever seen squash growing on manure piles.
Yeah.
They love that type of fertility. So, putting a good cup 444 or a composted steer manure or whatever fertilizer that you generally use in your garden, a good cup in the planting hole mixed in with the soil and the squash planted on top. The roots will eventually find that, and that's sort of the perfect conditions for growing squash.
And how long before we actually start to see those flowers coming, which is always the exciting thing?
Yes, it is. It can take, usually about a month or so before you start seeing the first flowers. And generally the first flowers are males. And so this is one thing on squash plants. The male and female are separate flowers. And that's how squash has evolved. It asks bees to do the work for it, carrying the pollen from the male to the female. So the first flowers on squash are always male. And that's generally to protect it in case there's a late frost. You know what? Male flowers are expendable.
Well, they're the ones that drop off so often, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, once the pollen has been shed, there's really nothing for them left to do. So, squash flowers are also edible. So if you ever wanted to pick squash flowers to make a dish, it's the males that you would pick anyways. And you can tell the difference from the base of the flower. In a male flower, it goes from flower to stem very quickly. In the female flower, there's a little baby squash at the bottom of the flower, and that's how you can really easily tell the difference.
Yeah, I love those little baby things. I mean, it really is noticeable, and until you pointed that out to me a few years ago, I really wasn't fully aware of that. It's like a little baby coming out of the actual flower.
Yeah.
So we don't have to worry when we see these flowers dropping off. So many people think, oh my goodness, something's wrong with my squash.
Yeah. No, generally early in the season, dropping flowers is normal because, as I said, those are usually the males. But if you start to see female flowers dropping, that's usually a sign that you're having a pollination problem. And so if you don't have a lot of bees in your garden, or if you're not seeing a lot of pollinators, then it's actually incumbent upon you to go out and do that pollination for the plant. So with a paintbrush or a Q-tip, you go around, pick up pollen from all the male flowers and just swirl it inside the female flower and do that pollination that the bee would have done.
I love it. I can just see you out there doing that. Do you have to do that very often?
No, I don't. We have a lot of pollinators on our farm, so right. I don't luckily have to do that. But I would say, anyone listening who's living in an urban environment where there's not a lot of pollinators, that might be something, if you've noticed, a lot of female flowers dropping off without any fruit. And this can happen in zucchini as well. So that's generally what's happened, is that the pollination is the problem.
And I've been planting buckwheat so that it starts to bloom around the same time as the squash, and alyssum, which is an annual, but the bees just seem to love it. Are there other flowers that you recommend we plant around the same time we transplant our squashes so that we attract those pollinators?
Yeah, you've got the two big ones, actually, the alyssums and the buckwheats. The flowering time coincides really nicely with squash. Cosmos is another one that generally, has a long flowering period and bees really like it. I'm thinking those are probably some of the best ones because, the flowering happens around end of June, early July, and then past that, well into August, when sunflowers start to appear, it's a little bit late anyways. So you want the early flowering flowers.
And what do we want to do along the way? Do we need to do any more feeding for the squash to make sure that we get lots of good, big, healthy squash?
Generally that 1 cup of fertilizer in the planting hole is more than enough, because what you want happen is you want the plant to grow nice and vigorously, but then you want it to go into a fruiting production. So you don't want to continue to add nitrogen onto the plant because it induces leafy growth and sometimes it delays the flowering. So that 1 cup is more than enough that plant will need for the entire season.
Okay, that makes sense. And can we use compost, like homemade compost instead of?
You can use like a homemade kitchen compost, like if it's only kitchen waste.
Yeah.
That's a fantastic soil conditioner, but it actually is very low in nitrogen.
Let's take a few more minutes and talk about carrots. It seems like they're so plentiful. They're not overly expensive when you see them in the stores. But boy, when you go to grow them, do you ever appreciate farmers?
Yes, I would say carrots are probably one of the more finicky vegetables to grow. So there's a few tricks to growing carrots.
Okay, good.
And I'm happy to pass those on.
Yes, let's hear them, my dear.
Okay, well, I think first of all, carrots are very slow germinating plants. It can take almost up to 10 days sometimes for carrot seed to come up. So you just need to be patient when you do seed carrots. The seed is tiny, so try not to bury it too deeply. That's often another common problem that I see. And spacing. To get a nice sized root, you generally want to space the carrot, a few inches, about an inch apart, which can be hard to do because the seed is so tiny. Often you are overseeding, which, is very, very normal. So thinning then becomes a thing that needs to be done. And I know as a gardener, you hate throwing out, anything that could make a plant, but in order for the carrots to size up, the thinning really is important. So that's just something to know about carrots in general, that they're slow germinating. They're going to need some space. So, the spacing of the seed is really important. And then the fertility in your soil. Here is where the big difference between squash and carrots is going to show up. You do not want to put a lot of nitrogen in a soil that grows any type of root vegetable. If you have too much nitrogen, what you end up seeing is plants with a lot of lush, leafy growth, but very small and tiny roots.
Oh, yeah, I've seen that. I've done that.
Yeah. So, that's just a sign that your soil is too rich. Like you're caring for your soil so well. And I'm sure we all want to kind of, go to that, but it's too much for a root vegetable. I mean, a rich soil like that is where you grow your heavy feeding, your cauliflowers and broccolis. But root vegetables really don't want to have that much nitrogen. They would like to have a good amount of phosphorus. So make sure either bone meal or rock phosphate or some other phosphorus sources in the soil. That's really what root vegetables would want to go after.
Okay, let me see if I got this. Be patient. They take a while to germinate. Don't plant too deeply. Space them about an inch apart. Thin them. Not too much nitrogen, but plenty of phosphorus. Thank you so much, Arzeena, for these squash and carrot tips. I can't believe how much we pack into our 15 minutes together. Let's gab again soon. We've got lots more questions to ask you. Can you join us again in a few weeks?
I would love to. Thanks so much for the invite.
Okay, we've been gabbing with Arzeena Hamir from Amara Farm. To learn more about Arzeena and her family farm, go to amarafarm.ca. That's AMARA farm, all one word, .ca. Well, I have never been to Haida Gwaii, but our next guest, Loni Taylor, has. Loni has recently returned from Haida Gwaii, and she's going to gab with us about her experiences with the plant life there. Stay with us. We'll be right back. You're listening to Gabbing About Gardening on Cortes Radio, 89.5 FM, CKTZ.
Ain't gonna let nobody turn me around, turn me around, turn me around. Ain't gonna let nobody turn me around. I'm gonna keep on a-walking, keep on a-talking, gonna build a brand new world. Ain't gonna let nobody turn me around, turn me around, turn me around. Ain't gonna let nobody turn me around. I'm gonna keep on a-walking, keep on a-talking, gonna build a brand new world. Ain't gonna let no trouble turn me round, turn me round, turn me round, turn me round. Ain't gonna let no trouble turn me round. Gonna keep on a-walking, keep on a-talking, gonna build a brand new world. Ain't gonna let no sorrow turn me round, turn me round, turn me round. Ain't gonna let no sorrow turn me round. Gonna keep on a-walking, keep on a-talking, gonna build a brand new world. Ain't gonna let no hatred turn me round, turn me round, turn me round. Ain't gonna let no hatred turn me round. Gonna keep on a-walking, keep on a-talking, gonna build a brand new world. Ain't gonna let no
Welcome back to Gabbing About Gardening. That's the wonderful band Willow, my favorite band on Quadra Island. And Loni Taylor is one of my favorite gardeners that I get to gab with on Cortes Island when we get together. This is her first time on the show, though. She's also a founding member of the Cortes Island Garden Club, and she recently visited Haida Gwaii. I've never been there, but we've reached Loni by phone to gab with us about her plant encounters. Hi, Loni. Welcome to Gabbing About Gardening.
Hi.
Hi. Thanks so much for being with us. So were you totally blown away by your Haida Gwaii experience?
I wouldn't say I was totally blown away, only because I missed
I didn't get to go to Gwaii. That's completely closed right now. And access to Reynolds Sound is also closed. So the West Coast is totally blocked off by landslides.
Oh, didn't know that. And what were some of the plants that you explored and were introduced to and that really impressed you?
Notable flower I got to spy was fairy slipper wild orchid. That was really stunning. It was in Naikun Provincial Park, and tiny little orchids, and they're very pink and just as ornate as any other orchid. Appreciated photographing that and enjoying that flower. The only other place I've seen orchids is in Colorado, where I am from.
Well, I hope you'll post any pictures on our Gabbing About Gardening Facebook page, Loni. We'd love to see your photographs.
Oh, I'll definitely share them.
So is there much that you know about the fairy slipper in terms of the way the indigenous peoples relate to it?
Not the fairy slipper, but one of the other plants I was really intrigued by was the false Solomon seal, because I have identified that in the past. I was able to recognize it once it started to pop up. And I know that to be a very medicinal plant and also an edible berry. And I'm a bit of a frutivore, so I really take an interest in the edible berry department.
I didn't know the false Solomon seal's berries were edible. So they were in flower when you were there, and when do they start to berry?
They weren't quite flowering yet when I was there, but I recognized the ribbed kind of spear-like leaf and central stem structure, and I actually found the berries from last season, like on the ground in the forest in a couple places. So that also kind of pointed for me to start looking for it when I first arrived. So I think that they definitely flower later in the season. I recall seeing them in the interior, more in the Slocan Valley, and they were fruiting in the fall.
So where does this love of plants of yours come from, Loni? It sounds like you have been paying attention to plants for quite a long time.
I grew up in Colorado, and I think that gave me a lot of exposure to the outdoors and also see quite a lot of diversity in ecosystems and start to take an interest in how all that works. But unfortunately, the interest didn't trigger, a background in education in it. I wish I had gone to school for agriculture now, but I didn't really get into ecology until I became an eco tour guide in Whistler, BC.
Mm-hmm. So you're really finely tuned to the native plants that you're discovering. Are there any other plants you'd like to tell us about that impressed you on your trip?
Well, the sheer abundance of salmonberry and thimbleberry and elderberry was just, that's what knocked me off my feet, I think, from the beginning in Haida Gwaii.
Okay, so you're cutting out just a wee bit. Let me make sure I got that. Salmonberries, thimbleberries, and elderberries. I guess those have really been main staples of the indigenous diets for thousands of years as well. Let me just ask you one more question. Are you planting a lot of native plants in your garden? Does your love of native plants cross over into making sure that you have a lovely selection of native plants in your own garden, Loni?
Absolutely. To be able to identify the native plants and keep them and encourage them in different areas of my garden.
Oh, Loni, we're just missing you so much. You know what? We're going to rebook another time to gab with you because our connection's just not very good. And I know that the Cortes Island Museum has some of the lovely native plants that you've talked about, Loni. Loni, thanks so much for being with us. We'll gab again soon when our connection is just a little bit better. That was Loni Taylor on Cortes Island. The connection wasn't that great, but boy, Loni's enthusiasm is fabulous. We'll get her back again soon. our next guest is a retired, award-winning science professor who studied hummingbirds for 40 years and then moved to Quadra Island to become a full-time sculptor. Dr. Lee Gass will gab with us about his past life studying hummingbirds and his current life carving rocks and wood. So don't go away. We'll be right back. I'm Lucretia. This is Gabbing About Gardening on CKTZ Cortes Radio, 89.5 FM.
Carry on, regardless of what everyone else says, 'cause you are the one who knows your own heart, and it's you that must decide, and it's you that must decide. We'll carry on, regardless of what everyone else says. Let your heart and soul be your only guide, and it's you.
Welcome back to Gabbing About Gardening. We are going to carry on. I'm your host, Lucretia Schanfarber. Well, when I first met Lee Gass, I was enchanted by his gardens. They had beautiful stone walkways and stone carvings that he had made. And then one day I looked in his compost bin and I discovered that he had more worms in his compost than I've ever seen anywhere before, except maybe my compost now. And well, I knew this guy was for me. Lee and I have been together for 25 years, and I still love gabbing with him and gardening with him and listening to his stories. So hi, Lee, and welcome to Gabbing About Gardening.
Well, it's really good to gab with you on the radio.
It's great to connect with you. I'm over here on Cortes. You're on Quadra, holding down the fort, filling up those hummingbird feeders every few minutes, it seems like. So tell us how you ended up studying hummingbirds, Lee.
Well, I grew up in the mountains in Northern California, and when in the 7th grade, I went to a place that was the most beautiful place I'd ever seen in my life, and it's still one of them. Later, when I was in college, I took a student friend of mine, and we went up there. You have to climb up a 600-foot cliff, essentially, and jump across a 100-foot waterfall to get to where we camp. And we were climbing up the mountain the next day, and we ran out of air and sat on a rock, and 3 hours later, I had this hummingbird movie in my mind because they were chasing each other in this meadow around us. And I got interested in how they know how much space to defend. That's how I got started.
I love that story. This is in the Trinity Alps. Now, in your carving studio on Quadra Island, you have a beautiful hand-carved wooden sign that says Delicate Meadow. And when I first saw that sign, I was really intrigued about it. Can you tell that story about that sign?
Well, I said you had to jump across that waterfall to get there, but you have to do a little up and down and on rocks to get there too, to the place where our camp was, which is on a shoulder of granite that came down off these places that avalanches roar down in the wintertime out into this lake with icebergs on it early in the season, and meadows in these avalanche gullies. Right by our camp, which was the most remote place you could be at this little lake called Grizzly Lake, right there in our camp, essentially, we lived on the rock, was what we called the Delicate Meadow. And it was delicate because there's not a lot of soil up there. And water was seeping down through it. And it would have been really, really easy to wreck that place. Not living there, but anybody walking through with a pack on their back, just wanting to get up the hill. So, and there was a mountain beaver that lived in the big rock right at the entry to the delicate meadow. It's an amazing animal that you almost never see. And so I carved that sign to help people understand that there was another way they could get up the mountain without tramping through that meadow.
So everybody started to follow a specific trail and not go off that trail. And you talk about perching on these rocks. Is that where you were perching as you were watching the hummingbirds? Because
No. Where I discovered them was way up there where those people were going. 1,000 foot higher. But we were already at 7,000 feet. When I said perch, I meant where we lived, down on that shoulder of pure, clean, glacier-polished white granite.
Right, where you set up your camp.
And every morning, before light, you'd get up and go up this steep place that required you to do a little rock climbing at night, well, when it was still dark, and then ease your way down the nub of this cliff to a little place where you could put your butt on the edge of this cliff with a nice rock place to put your feet and to put your tape recorder and to put all this stuff you needed to have. When the birds got up and came from the warmer places to sleep into these meadows that they had territories in. And we'd sit there, I'd sit there on the edge of that cliff and look down at these hummingbirds doing their thing. But because I was looking down into the meadow, I could see every place in the meadow. I could see the bird everywhere it went. Well, unless it chased somebody else out of its territory, then it'd be gone for some number of seconds, and then you'd come back and sit on a perch, maybe a different perch this time. And so later, this is way later, I was keeping track of what those birds did down to about 1/10 of a second accuracy. Where they went, how long it took them to get there, what they did when they got there, and because we understood quite a bit about how much it costs to fly a hummingbird, it costs about as much as it costs to fly a helicopter, pound for pound. That meant we were keeping track of that bird in terms of energy, calories, second by second. And we could try to understand how it gained almost 40% of its body weight in a week and a half.
Yeah, I thought only I could gain weight that quickly. So.
If only I could lose it that quick.
That's right. That's what I want to know. That's the next research you better do. So
I'm doing it, but I haven't got the secret yet.
40 years of researching hummingbirds. What is something that you learned about hummingbirds, Lee, that people might not realize?
I think the most important thing is also something people might not realize. Not just about hummingbirds. That just happened to be what I studied. Other people study other things. But what we found about these little 3.5-gram birds is it takes a lot of smarts to be a hummingbird. You got to be able to remember things, and not just remember things either. Like you memorize things for tests. No. Like really learn them so you can use that information in new situations. Because they're always in new situations, flying back and forth between Mexico and Canada every year. And if they're going to have any babies, and if their babies are going to survive, they better be pretty good at using their brain. Well, that's the biggest thing I learned, that you put hummingbirds up against anybody, that practically anybody, like even some primate comparisons. Mind-blowing, can I say that?
Mm-hmm.
Like, it really shocks hard-nosed scientists to realize sometimes how smart wild animals really are.
Yeah. I've been hearing you make that statement for as long as we've been together, and I really never tire of it because I think it's such an important thing for us to appreciate. And I think plants are way more intelligent than we give them credit for as well, don't you?
Well, I don't have any trouble saying they know what they're doing. You know, the same way I say it about hummingbirds. Even though I don't think they know what they're doing in the same way we do, or understand what they're doing in the same way we do, they're just really good at doing it.
Mm-hmm.
And plants are good at doing it. And those earthworms that I had and you got now, they know what they're doing.
Yep, they sure do. So how many hummingbirds are at the feeder right now there hanging on your deck at Bold Point on Quadra Island?
Well, I'm going to cheap out on this one. And I'll just tell you, I asked my wife the other day how many she'd seen at the same time when she and her friend were sitting on the deck, just talking and having a drink. How many had she seen at the same time at the 2 feeders that we had at that time on the deck? And she said, I'm pretty sure that there were 20 at one time. And I said, okay, that's about what we had last year. But the babies haven't come out yet. And I put 2 more feeders up yesterday. And so they had more than a quart of 4-to-1 sugar water. However many hummingbirds we had, that's where it went.
And a lot of them make their way into the house, it seems. Have there been any flying in today that you had to escort back outside?
Well, I'm not ashamed to tell you that it's a bit cool to have the house open today. And so it hasn't been, except when I was going out to get the feeders and take them back out full.
Mm-hmm. It's such an amazing feeling, though, holding that beautiful little bird in your hand and then opening your hand ever so slowly and having it take off. Hey, Lee, thank you so much for joining us today on Gabbing About Gardening.
Well, you're welcome.
And please keep those hummingbird feeders filled up, would you?
I will. And I hope to talk with you again someday.
Yes, you bet you will. That was Professor Lee Gabs. Bye-bye, Lee. Gabbing with us from Quadra Island about his 40 years of researching hummingbirds in the Trinity Alps of California. You can see Lee's sculptures and read his stories on his website, leegass.com. Well, that's our show for this week. Thanks again to our generous sponsors, Cortes Market and Speedy Bin Composters. Now, next week, we'll gab with more local gardeners about what's being harvested in local gardens and how it's being prepared. Jennifer Banks-Dahl will be with us gabbing about her strawberries and her peas. And biologist Stephen Mooney will gab about how mushrooms help our gardens grow. It used to be that mushrooms were a no-no, but now we know that they're great for the garden. Remember to check out the Listening to Bees exhibit at the Cortes Island Museum. It's getting rave reviews, and you can visit cortesmuseum.com for more information. And be sure to check out our podcasts on cortesradio.ca. Remember to join us on Facebook and on Instagram. And also, did you know that every Monday on Zoom, we host the Gabbing About Gardening free Zoom gathering for gardeners. And next Monday, we'll gab with Lee Gass about art in the garden. And he's going to show us how well art and plants really do go together. Thanks so much for being with us today on Gabbing About Gardening. I'm Lucretia Schanfarber, and a huge thank you to our show and podcast producer, Brian McKinnon. And now I think we've got a new song from Willow, Mina Winchoa, Water is Life. This is Cortes Community Radio, CKTZ, 89.5 FM. Thanks for tuning in. Now, get outside and get dirty.
All my relations come every nation come, all my relations under the sun. We are one. We are praying, come. We are praying, come. We are the song and we are the drum. We are one. We are the river, come. We are the river, come. We are the boat, the paddle, the shore. We are one. Minawachoni say, Minawachoni say, Minawachoni, water is life for everything. We are the water, say. We are the water, say. We are the water, we are where all life begins. We are the ancient ones. We are the ancient ones. In your breath and bones we sing on. We are one. We are the meadow, come. We are the meadow, come. We are the lark that sings, a new day has begun. We are the new day, run, run, run. We are the new day, run, run, run. We are the old and we are the young. We are one. Minawachoni say, Minawachoni say, Minawachoni, water is life for everything. We are the water, say. We are the water, say. We are the water, we are where all life begins. We are the earth and sky. We are the thunder cries. We are the fire, we are the light in your eyes. We are standing strong, like a rock, like a stone. On the sacred ground we belong. We are home. Minawachoni say, Minawachoni say, Minawachoni, water is life for everything. We are the water.